In the last episode of this series, Lee Petty won his third championship in 6 seasons. So today, we're going to look at the 1955 season and how it would play out with a consistent points format. In 1955, we would have 8 full-time drivers: 1954 runner-up Buck Baker, defending champion Lee Petty, Bob Wellborn, Tim Flock, Jimmy Llewellyn, Eddie Skinner, Jim Paschal, and Junior Johnson. In the opening 9 races, Lee Petty would win the season opener at High Point, then again 2 races later at Jacksonville, and then again at race 5 at Savannah. Tim Flock would win race 4 at Daytona Beach, and then again at race 9 in Montgomery. Jim Paschal would win the race at Hillsboro, and Buck Baker would win race 8 at North Wilkesboro. So after the opening 9 races, the top 2 drivers from 1954 were once again at the top. At Langhorne, Baker would finish 2nd and Petty would finish 7th, closing the gap to 76 points. At Charlotte, Buck Baker would win the race while Petty finished 18th, and the gap was now just 14 points. At Hickory, Petty finished 4th while Baker finished 11th, and the gap grew to 44 points. 3 races later at Martinsville, Petty would finish 2nd while Baker would finish 6th, and the gap grew to 64 points. At Richmond, Petty would finish 3rd and Baker would finish 17th, growing the gap to 117 points. At Raleigh, Baker would finish 3rd and Petty 4th, shrinking the gap to 112 points. At Winston-Salem, Petty won the race while Baker finished 12th, and after 18 races, Baker was trailing behind Petty by quite a bit. At New Oxford, Baker would finish 3rd while Petty finished 14th, and the gap shrunk to 121 points. At Rochester, Baker would finish 16th and Petty 20th, shrinking the gap to 109 points. At Fonda, Petty would finish 3rd and Baker 4th, growing the gap to 114 points. At Plattsburgh, Petty would win and Baker would finish 2nd, and the gap was now 124 points. At Charlotte, Baker would finish 2nd and Petty would finish 9th, shrinking the gap to 92 points. At Spartanburg, Petty would finish 3rd and Baker would come home 4th, growing the gap to 97 points. At Columbia, Baker finished 5th while Petty finished 13th, and the gap was now 66 points. At Weaverville, Baker finished 9th and Petty finished 18th, shrinking the gap to 37 points. At Morristown, Petty would solidly finish 2nd while Baker disappointingly finished 23rd, and now, with 18 races to go, defending champion Lee Petty had a sizable lead over Buck Baker. At Altamont, Petty finished 3rd while Baker had a horrible day, finishing in 25th, growing the gap to 185 points. At Syracuse, Petty finished 3rd while Baker finished 9th, and he would slip back to 3rd, 212 points back. Meanwhile, Tim Flock, who won the race, moved into 2nd, and was now 207 points behind. At San Mateo, Flock would win again while Petty finished 6th, and Flock was now 177 points behind, and Baker finished 5th, and was now 212 points back. At Charlotte, Flock finished 5th while Petty finished 10th, and shrunk the gap to 156 points. Baker finished 3rd and shrunk the gap to 181 points. At Winston-Salem, Lee Petty would win the race while Flock would finish 7th, and grew the gap to 190 points, and Baker would finish 3rd and was now 201 points behind. At Lehigh, Petty finished 19th while Flock would finish 3rd and shrink the gap to 126 points. Buck Baker would finish 5th and was now 152 points behind. At Raleigh, Flock would finish 2nd while Petty had a horrible race, finishing 22nd, and the gap between him and Flock was now 48 points. Buck Baker would finish 5th and he was now 99 points back. At the Southern 500, Lee Petty would once again have an abysmal race and finish 21st, while Flock would finish 3rd, and Flock would take the point lead by 22 points over Petty, and Baker finished 6th. It was now 71 points behind in 3rd. At Montgomery, Flock would win the race, and now with 9 races left, Tim Flock seemed to be in control over 3-time and defending champion Lee Petty and Buck Baker. At Langhorne, Flock would win while Petty would finish a horrible 28th, and he would slip back to 3rd, 150 points back. Baker would have a decent 6th place finish and would move into 2nd, and was now 136 points behind. At Raleigh, Flock would finish 3rd while Baker finished 7th, growing the gap to 160 points. And Petty would finish 9th and is now 182 points back. At Greenville, Flock would win again, while Baker finished 5th, and it was now 190 points back. And Lee Petty would drop out of contention with a 10th place finish. At Lehigh, Flock would finish 4th, while Baker finished 6th, and the gap would extend to 205 points. Fast forward 2 races to Martinsville, where Baker would outrun Flock with a 10th place finish, and Flock would finish 24th, shrinking the gap to 167 points. Fast forward to the penultimate race of the season in North Wilkesboro, and due to the field size at the finale, and Hillsboro only being 25 cars, the max amount of points Flock could lose at the finale was 97 points. So at North Wilkesboro, all Flock had to do was finish 19th, and despite Baker dominating the race, Flock would finish 5th, and he would lock up the championship a week early. And to add to his second championship season, he would cap it off with a win in the finale at Hillsboro. So either way, in 1955, Tim Flock would claim his second championship. This season, early on, would seem to be a repeat of 1954, with Lee Petty and Buck Baker fighting for the title once again. But with Tim Flock making up almost 800 points from the start of the season, and just making the most of his other competitors' misfortunes, he would climb up the standings and win his second title. Well, that'll do it for today, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for 1956.